At Stratford University, located in the middle of the state of California, Daryl, a student studying economics, guides another group of newly enrolled freshmen, while giving them all an orientation on the respective areas of the institution. During the expedition, the young man tells them that he is a veteran member of the local community, and as the financial support offered by the university is extremely low, he is forced to work tirelessly in the cafeteria and as a student guide so that he can pay his expenses. At the end of the tour, the young man becomes increasingly desperate as he realizes that another group of newcomers is waiting for the next tour around the institution. A few hours later, Daryl talks to his mother on the phone and explains that thanks to the great competition for candidates, he hasn't yet been called for any positions in the Smythe Bates building, but that he is already in one of the selection processes. Due to the financial difficulties he is facing, the university student tries to donate his blood repeatedly, using various disguises throughout the day to receive payment for his donations. Excited by all the funds he is receiving, Daryl tries to make even more donations, but when he realizes that no other institution will accept him, he gives up and leaves. The next day, the young man continues his work in the university canteen, where he bumps into Scott, who reveals that he has also applied for the job at Smythe Bates. When he hears the sudden news, Daryl is worried, as the young man is the president of the student union, and the son of one of the presidents of the Manhattan Bank, so he could end up getting the job easily. Soon afterwards, the students head for the classroom, where they receive a visit from Randall Tyson, one of Smythe Bates' executive leaders, who tells them that 5 students will be selected for the company's junior analyst selection process. In order to decide on the best candidates for the job, the manager asks the students to describe the solution to a financial problem, and Daryl tries to answer the question. However, the young man ends up being interrupted by Scott, who answers the question correctly and humiliates his colleague straight away. On the field hockey court, Daryl begs his coach to give him a chance to join the institution's team, as he needs to have a complete athletic record to join his dream company, but the man refuses to offer the young man any help and asks him to leave. Desperate, the university student goes to Tim, his roommate, and asks him to talk to his coach so that he can get a chance to join the team. As a result, Daryl is put in charge of one of the teams, but having never played field hockey before in his life, the young man is completely lost and ends up being hit by dozens of pucks all over his body. Later, the student is collecting garbage around the campus, when he comes across a poster that reveals a reward that will be given to anyone who offers to be a guinea pig for a new pharmaceutical substance that has recently been invented. Curious about what he has just discovered, Daryl decides to sign up for the tests, but after hearing about the possible side effects that the solution could cause, all the participants end up giving up, making the university student the only guinea pig left. So the young man goes to Dr. Whedon's laboratory, who explains that the substance will amplify the student's senses up to 10 times more, as it is an extremely powerful compound. At that moment, Daryl learns that he will be paid up to $3,000 if he agrees to try the compound, and despite the thousands of risks that the chemical solution could bring to his body, he accepts the deal and takes the substance without a second thought. At the end of the day, the young man goes to a party for the student council, and when he meets Scott, he asks the young man to accept him as the new member of his team, so that he can prove his intellectual abilities. However, the university president doesn't accept the request, and after humiliating him in front of all his colleagues, he orders the young man to leave, as he doesn't belong there. Devastated, Daryl returns to his apartment, and after taking the chemical vial from his backpack, he decides to use the substance on himself, so that he can test the side effects. The next day, the young man arrives at the classroom, where the professor reveals that the day of the big assessment has arrived, and they will decide who the candidates will be for the position of junior analyst at Smythe Bates. As the exams begin, Daryl begins to smell something extremely bad, and he can hear everything that is happening around him, as well as the noises made by all his colleagues. Thanks to this, the university student goes into a state of despair and freaks out in front of all the students, who are frightened by his behavior. Irritated, the professor orders the young man to sit down again and to remain silent for the entire assessment, otherwise he will be expelled from the room. Sometime later, Daryl goes to Dr. Whedon's laboratory, saying that he is feeling extremely strange, and that he has a great itch in peculiar places. Trying to calm him down, the scientist explains that his guinea pig's brain is trying to get used to the side effects, and says that as soon as the young man's body is able to exercise its abilities, he will be able to control his special senses. Despite the warning, the young man decides to ignore Dr. Whedon's recommendations, and after finishing scratching himself, he leaves. In the morning, Tim goes to his roommate and asks why the young man is wearing so much protection on his face. So that he doesn't have to reveal everything he's done over the last few days, the university student explains that he's feeling ill, and since he failed the test to join Smythe Bates, he decides to stay at home to get some rest. With that, Tim heads off to his field hockey practice, and Daryl goes to his apartment window so he can concentrate on controlling his powers. After a few seconds, the young mutant is able to exercise his special abilities, allowing him to maintain full control of his senses. As a result, the university student decides to go to his institution's get-together, where the finalists of the selection process talk to the Smythe Bates executives. Wanting to impress the businessmen, Daryl hides a financial newspaper in one of the tables and uses his mutant vision to recite the month's investment table, which leaves all the members of the table completely impressed. At the end of the party, Randall Tyson walks up to the young man and asks why he wasn't one of the finalists in the selection process, as he has a high level of knowledge about the financial market. Daryl explains that due to his large number of jobs, he couldn't study enough for the assessments, which caused him to be eliminated from the competition. Touched by the young man's dedication, Randall tells him that he would like him to return to the selection process so that he can be rewarded for all his efforts. Furious at everything he's hearing, Scott says that the 5 contestants have already been selected, but the executive explains that this won't be a problem, and declares that Daryl will be the 6th member of the selection process. Excited about the opportunity, the university student thanks his new chance and says goodbye to the businessmen. Back at the lab, Daryl completes another of his vision tests, and Dr. Whedon explains that his students' senses are becoming more and more powerful, so he must continue to consume the substance so that they can continue to study its side effects. During the evening, the mutant goes to another of the student guild's parties, and thanks to the knowledge he has shown the executives, Daryl is accepted as the newest member of the organization, having been invited by Randall Tyson himself. At the end of the event, he comes across Janice, with whom he is completely in love, and offers to accompany her home. The next day, Daryl returns to the field hockey court and asks the coach to let him try playing one more time, as he has been practicing in his spare time. In the middle of the conversation, the university student notices a saucer coming quickly towards the man and grabs it with his gloves. Impressed, the coach decides to give his pupil another chance and makes him goalkeeper for one of the teams. Thanks to his newly sharpened senses, Daryl is able to defend all the players' shots, which impresses the teachers and gets him accepted onto the student team. So the university student takes part in the next field hockey championship, and during the match, he manages to defend all the opposing team's shots, allowing Tim to score several points easily. Noticing the presence of the new goalie, the narrators are surprised, as they had no idea that Daryl was such a great field hockey player. Seconds before the game is over, the enemy team members rush the defense and throw the puck at Daryl, who manages to block the shot with his feet. With that, all the students went wild, as for the first time in many years, the university won its first field hockey match. The next morning, Daryl goes to Randall Tyson's building, and while waiting for the meeting with Scott to finish, he uses his powerful hearing to listen in on the stock talk so that he can prepare his answers. Soon afterwards, the businessman arrives in the waiting room, and when he sees the man, the university student says that he can help them with all their shareholder questions, using the information he has collected as examples of his knowledge. Impressed, Randall decides to dismiss Scott and asks Daryl to accompany him to his office so they can talk in private. During his meeting, the candidate states that he will not waste this opportunity, and even if he is the last member of the student team, he will not give up on his dreams. When he hears this, the executive says that expectations of university students are getting higher and higher, and asks them to maintain their efficiency throughout the selection process. In addition, Randall reveals that his partner will have a business meeting with Arlo Vikers, the owner of one of the largest mining companies in the region, who is considering becoming a major client of the company. So the man asks Daryl to accompany his partner to the professional meeting, which will take place in one of the city's most famous basketball stadiums. After handing out the tickets for the game, Randall orders his apprentice to impress his potential client in the same way he did all the other executives, as this will increase his chances of being selected by the managers. Excited, the young man says that he will do his best and do everything he can to convince Arlo to become another investor of the company. At the end of the day, Daryl returns to his apartment, and before going to bed, he decides to apply another dose of his chemical substance, so that he will be even more powerful for the next day's meeting. Believing that his friend may be slipping into drug addiction, Tim decides to contact a rehabilitation center, as he concludes that the young man could end his own life. The problem is that the side effects become more and more powerful, and when he gets up in the morning, the university student realizes that his body is completely dysregulated, preventing him from even walking properly. Worried, Daryl rushes to Dr. Whedon's laboratory, and after receiving the news about what his guinea pig has done, the scientist is furious, as this could cause serious health problems for the student. The professor explains that for the next 3 days, the young man will have his senses completely scrambled, causing his body to become confused and start collapsing randomly. For this reason, Whedon says that the best option would be for his guinea pig to rest, but Daryl says that this will be impossible, as the final decision on Smythe Bates' position will be made before then. Furious at everything that is happening, the young mutant decides to ignore the scientist's orders and leaves so that he can prepare for his business meeting. At the basketball stadium, the executives meet Arlo Vikers in the stands, and before he can have a normal conversation with the client, Daryl begins to lose consciousness, preventing him from hearing any words coming from the businessman. Trying to disguise his panic, the university student decides to look for the drinks vendor, but at that moment, his hearing stops working, causing him to start screaming during the singing of the country's national anthem. Despite the strange situation, Arlo becomes more and more entertained and watches the game while Daryl runs around screaming madly. A few minutes later, the student returns to the stands, but suddenly his vision starts to blur, preventing him from watching the competition. Thanks to this, Daryl ends up getting distracted and going to sit next to one of the players, who, after hearing the man's criticism of his group, becomes extremely angry. So the athlete throws the young man towards the court, where Daryl is photographed by dozens of journalists who were standing around. At the end of the meeting, the candidate is taken home by Rendell, who reveals that despite his attitudes, the deal was concluded, and Arlo ended up signing the contract with the company, since he was just as unbalanced as the university student. Relieved, Daryl returns to his apartment, and as he is getting ready for bed, he receives a visit from Lorraine, one of the members of the student council. Believing that this could be his friend's supplier, Tim becomes extremely worried and decides to contact the rehabilitation center once again. Confused by Lorraine's sudden appearance, Daryl asks why she's visiting, and the woman says she's madly in love with him. When he hears this, the university student tries to resist his colleague's temptations, but at that moment, his senses begin to fail him again, driving him completely mad. Despite the young man's strange attitudes, Lorraine tries to continue her seduction, but when she notices Daryl's behavior, the young woman gets angry and leaves disappointed. With that, the university student leaves the place, and when she comes across her classmate, Janice is confused and runs towards her boyfriend's apartment. Upon entering the room, the woman finds Daryl completely weakened on the floor, and after concluding that she has just been betrayed by her partner, she becomes furious and leaves the place. Devastated by everything that has just happened, the young mutant crawls around the apartment in tears, only to be found by Tim, who has brought a group of rehabilitation staff to save his friend's life. Realizing that the young man doesn't seem to have long to live due to the overdose, the group prepares to perform a painful injection on Daryl, who wakes up in despair when he sees the needle. A few minutes later, the pair of friends discuss the misunderstanding that occurred earlier, and the mutant claims that his senses aren't working properly, thanks to the side effects of the chemical substance for which he had offered to be the guinea pig. Later, Daryl is summoned to the initiation ceremony for the new members of the student guild, and after preparing an extremely disgusting drink, Scott orders the young man to drink his macabre recipe so that he can be considered a true member of the organization. At that moment, the university student's senses of taste stop working, allowing him to consume the entire container without even tasting it, which leaves the leader extremely confused. Annoyed, Scott explains that the next stage of the initiation is the punishment blows, and orders Daryl to prepare to be hit by various attacks. However, the man's senses of touch remain completely deactivated, so he can take all the blows without any effort. The next day, the next field hockey match is about to start, but just then, Daryl realizes that his vision is getting blurrier and blurrier. Meanwhile, the Smythe Bates executives sit down to watch the competition, eager to witness the young man's incredible skills. Thanks to his poor eyesight, the university student is unable to defend any of the shots made by the opposing team, and in the midst of the chaos, he ends up hitting Tim with one of his attacks, causing the youngster to be taken off the pitch. Eventually, the competition is quickly brought to an end, and the Stratford team receives one of the worst defeats in the university's history. Devastated by everything he has just caused, Daryl walks to Janice's apartment so that he can apologize to his girlfriend, but at that moment, he ends up being attended to by Randall. As he hasn't fully recovered, the university student still can't see properly, so he talks to the executive as if she were his girlfriend, but when he gets too close, he ends up receiving a blow to his lower parts. Upon hearing the commotion in her apartment, Janice runs to Daryl and reveals that Randall is none other than her father. Soon afterwards, the university student takes her boyfriend out of the room, and despite hearing all his excuses, she decides to reject him, ending the relationship. Wanting to reverse all the problems he has caused around him, Daryl goes to Tim and asks his friend to help him study for the next executive review, which will take place the following day. Far from there, Scott goes to his father's office, who reveals that he has contacted a huge team of businessmen to help him with his studies and ensure that he gets the job at Smythe Bates as a result. The finalists in the selection process study various financial theories, but while Daryl does his best to stay focused, Scott continues his ignorant behavior and treats the executives as if they were his personal employees. Concerned about the young man's performance, the managers say that he should memorize the reasons why financial decisions are made, but Scott says that this won't be necessary. In the middle of the night, the university student finishes all the content, and after saying goodbye to his friend, he leaves so that he can prepare for the big final exam. In the morning, Daryl walks towards the Smythe Bates building, but halfway there, he loses his sight once again, and so as not to be late, he decides to ask one of the homeless people for help. The problem is that the man is nothing more than a criminal, and after taking him to one of the local alleyways, he strikes the university student several times, allowing him to steal his clothes. Desperate, Daryl uses a garbage can lid to cover his body and runs to a clothing store, where he asks one of the clerks to help him put on a new outfit, since his interview will take place in less than 10 minutes. With that, the young man runs to the executive building, and after passing the reception desk, he heads for the bathroom, where he realizes that the salesman has dressed him in a completely insane outfit. As if that wasn't bad enough, Daryl ends up having his senses affected once again, making it impossible for him to speak, and he ends up wetting his pants. Looking at the ground, the young man notices that a large part of the chemical has already been eliminated through his urine, and takes advantage of the sudden discovery to try to concentrate and control his senses, allowing him to regain control of his body. Now that he's refreshed, Daryl sets off towards the auditorium, and after gathering, the finalists prepare for the final assessment of Smythe Bates' position. In a few hours, the other participants are quickly eliminated from the selection process, and during the evaluations, the university student realizes that Janice and Tim haven't come to the venue to watch the competition, so the executives begin the last test, and after answering the question correctly, Scott is told to justify his ideas. The problem is that in his ignorance, the man realizes that he hasn't studied the topics properly, which has meant that he doesn't know how to finish his explanation, forcing him to declare that he doesn't know the answer. Just then, Daryl realizes that Janice and Tim have finally made it to the auditorium, and shortly afterwards, the young man is called up by the evaluation speaker, who asks him to answer the question about the financial graph. Quickly, the university student walks up to the board, and thanks to several hours of study the night before, he manages to answer the question with extreme precision, leaving everyone impressed with his knowledge. Proud of the young man's performance, Randall declares that Daryl is the winner of the competition, and will receive the position of junior analyst at Smythe Bates, causing the entire auditorium to start applauding the student. With that, the winner is invited to give a speech of thanks, but at that moment, Daryl feels guilty for all the lies he has told in recent days, and decides to tell the truth about his mutant abilities. After revealing his practices to everyone in the auditorium, the university student claims that he didn't use his powers to cheat in the final test, but rather to reach the group of selected students. Thanks to the sudden confession, the executives meet to decide who will be the real winner of the selection process, and after the meeting, Randall states that there will be no new junior analyst this year. The man explains that despite the misunderstandings, he believes Daryl deserves his second chance, as in recent days he has shown himself to be extremely dedicated to his dream career. So Randall reveals that he will hire the young man to work on the company's shipments, and if he keeps up his great performance, he will automatically be hired as a junior analyst in the next selection process. The following year, Daryl and his family celebrate the acquisition of their new position at Smythe Bates, and during the party, the new manager reveals that he will be renting a luxury apartment for his family, so that they can live a new life in the most luxurious area of the city. So what did you think of this movie? Leave it in the comments below, and if you liked the video, like and subscribe for more movie recaps. See you next time.